Mike DeCourcy, the king of all media, is with us as well, back from his trek around the world.
Oh,
Mike,
yeah.
how are you doing, sir?
Oh, my goodness. It was it was certainly a fascinating weekend to be in San Francisco to see the Duke Blue Devils make Mike Krzyzewski's 13th Final Four. But that trip back, man, it gets you, right?
Oh my God, I'm still paying. I swear to God, I'm still paying for Portland.
So it was a busy weekend, but it was a good weekend, and and we're facing another one now. Last one of the college basketball season. It should be an interesting Final Four, I think.
Duke and North Carolina never happened in the NCAA tournament. Is that right?
That is correct. It's never happened. It came. I don't know if any other times it came close, but the one it's most famous for coming close was here in Indianapolis in 1991 when Carolina played Kansas in one semifinal, and that Kansas team was coached by Roy Williams, and the Duke Blue Devils played UNLV in the second semifinal, and Kansas beat that Carolina team. So even though Duke pulled the upset, there was no chance for them to meet. But it's really interesting now in history, right, that the three of them, Krzyzewski, Smith, Williams, were all there in that building on that night coaching their teams. And then, of course, there was lots of intersection between them ever since.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then for them to not have met throughout their fainted history, and for it to happen now on Krzyzewski's way out in the Final Four, kind of apropos, I guess you'd say. And then also the ACC, a great showing in the tournament, and it shows again, man. The regular season is it's now become a demarcation line. There is a definitive change of seasons now in college basketball between the regular season and the postseason. I mean, man, you can be hot going into it, or you can get hot once you get to it, and it's all the same. But the excitement this year of these upsets, which we always have, but the parity just seemed to be greater this year.
Well, I told you guys on multiple occasions that this was a season of flawed teams, that the whole key to getting to where these teams are now will be disguising your flaws, that making sure that others don't see it. And to an extent, I think Duke in their case, they adjusted their flaw. They changed the way they played. They're running more sets than they used to now because they have to cover for the fact that their point guard isn't the creator. He doesn't make plays. He can get the ball up the floor, and he's a pretty good defender on the ball. He's not great, but he's good enough. And so they decided that they would play more like that they would run more sets and just ask him to start the set and not necessarily to create. You don't see them run a ton of pick and roll like some teams do because they don't have that player. So they do other things to get their shooters open, and they're really good at it now. And as they've continued to escalate in that department, they've become better and better. I mean, they have one of the things that Jeremy Roach, their point guard, does do is that after they start their offense, when you're defending them, you're looking at having to defend Paolo Banchero, who will be a top 3 pick and can attack as a ball handler from the power forward spot at 6'10", which is really unusual. And then you have Wendell Moore, who's a really good player off the bounce as a wing and an excellent creator for a small forward, but not really somebody you'd want to run as a point guard. And they did some nice things, have done some nice things running their offense through him, but they've been better since they went back to him being, a scoring wing who can create rather than a creator who maybe gets some buckets now and then. But then what happens is when you're all gummed up with dealing with that, and you've got Mark Williams, who's 6'11", 7 feet, and super dynamic and super long, that you have to always be worried that if the ball's coming into the lane and he's near the rim, that they're just going to throw it up and he's going to go get it. So Roach has gotten really good at understanding that you're so worried about those other guys that you don't think he's going to hurt you. And then he'll get to the lane, get to the rim. And then again, as I mentioned, boy, if I come on him, if I leave Williams, I mean, he's just going to throw it over the top and it's going down hard. So they let him go, and he winds up with a bunch of layups. He's done really well with that in this tournament. It hurt Michigan State. It really hurt Texas Tech because they were, they're such a great defense. They're so hard to penetrate, and he was able to do that.
Kevin?
Mike, I'm curious about your thoughts on the Big Ten. Is this a league that peaks too early, or what is your assessment in terms of, this year, no teams advancing past the Sweet 16?
Well, I think the first thing that needs to be understood about that is that they weren't supposed to go past the Sweet 16. They did not have a single team on the top two lines, and they didn't warrant it. And what they had was a lot of good teams, some very good teams. Now, should Purdue have beaten St. Peter's? Yes, but I'm just talking about the original perception that that when you get 9 teams in, you're supposed to do X. I don't know what X, whatever X is a kind of a fungible thing. It depends on how much people hate your league, and so when they got 9 in, and if you look at it from a seed standpoint, how many games are you supposed to win based on your original seed? They lost one more game than they should have. So, I mean, now, again, like I said, when you get to the Sweet 16 and you're Purdue and you're playing a 15 seed, you got to win. And that was a poor performance. And I suppose like Iowa would be considered a disappointing performance because they lost to a 12, although that, it's different when you're a team, when you go into the NCAA tournament and you're facing a knuckleball pitcher instead of, somebody who throws fastballs and sliders. I mean, and that's what they got. They got a team that played Princeton offense, and they would never have seen that team if Davidson gotten one more rebound. Richmond would not have won that game, and they wouldn't have been in the tournament. But they lost the game, and that's a disappointment. There's no question. But they also had Indiana win a 50-50 game and Rutgers lose a 50-50 game. They had the 2 7 seeds, Ohio State and Michigan State, both win their games and then play reasonably tough against teams that are now in the Final Four. And Ohio State wasn't great in that game, but they were competitive in the final 5 minutes. They were down 6. And Michigan State nearly won against a team that may end up winning the national championship. So I don't think either of those teams really disappointed in this tournament. I think the only one that you could be really disappointed in was Purdue because the door opened for them. And, with 1 and 2 losing and they're the 3, and then you're playing a 15, you got to at least get to the Elite 8 there. I mean, and so that was a disappointment. There's no doubt. But I don't think the league overall has had a disappointing season. I didn't think the league would be this good this year. I didn't think that they would find 9 teams that could make it. So the fact that they did that, I thought they had a good year. People don't like the Big Ten. And, and just as they don't like Duke, when you're successful, they don't like you. And so the fact that they were poor last year, and last year was poor. I mean, last year they had 1s and 2s that didn't go anywhere. That's a poor performance. There's nobody in the Big Ten who's going to say that wasn't poor. This year was just okay in the tournament. And for a season, it was pretty good. To have 9 teams that you could take. But the idea that this is happening all the time is preposterous. I mean, first of all, they don't get a lot of teams all the time, or they wouldn't have had 4 in 2018. 4 out of 14. That's not a lot, guys. And then the other thing about it is that if you look at it from a standpoint of production and effectiveness, if you go back to I haven't done the window this year, but if you go back from 2010 to last season, which is 2021, that window of tournaments, they were second in winning percentage, second in victories, first in Final Four teams. What do you want? Well, what you want is to have something to criticize the league you don't like. Okay, we get it. Certainly the Big Ten would much rather have Final Four teams and Elite Eight teams. They didn't this year. They didn't last year. But getting 9 teams in what a lot of us thought, I'm sure you did too, Kevin, thought, if they have 7, it'll be a good year. And they go out and get 9. And I think that's a pretty strong performance.
Yeah. Let's remind ourselves that the SEC didn't get any teams they had 1 in the Sweet 16, and they had a bunch of 2 seeds that bowed out in around of 32. So
they had 1, 2. They had 2 2s and a 3. That 2 2s, a 2 and a 3, and 2 2s and a 3 that lost before the Sweet 16. Now that's underperformance. I think they were a -7, if I remember correctly. I was exchanging texts with Andy Katz on Friday night. The SEC was a -7 in terms of victories based on what they were seeded. I mean, they had 2 6s, remember, too, that also lost in the first round. So they really underperformed. And yeah, I like I said, it wasn't a great year for the Big Ten in tournament performance, but it wasn't a disaster either.
No, so and the Big Ten going forward, does this, after a couple of years of this, does it change how teams focus? Because during the season, when we watch Big Ten play, quote unquote Big Ten play, it's always thought of as a big banging league, and then thought that you can't do that in the tournament. I don't know that I agree with that. I think a lot of times it's just matchup problems.
Well, I heard, but it's not a big banging league. Like, they got big guys, but but the idea that that's how they're playing. I mean, Wisconsin wasn't that. No, but they didn't win. That was not who they were. Iowa,
just because
Iowa didn't even have a center, really. I mean,
just because a lot of teams had some big guys, because I think about Illinois. Yeah, they have Kofi Coburn, but I'm thinking about those guards that they had out front.
Illinois didn't even really have a power forward. I mean, they had, like you could say, they had a stretch 4, but I mean, there was no power in there. They struggled to get rebounds in the game they lost to Houston. That was, the problem. Houston was much more a power team than Illinois was. Illinois' problem in that game was they couldn't make a shot when they were sending 72 defenders after Kofi and leaving everybody open, and nobody could make a shot. Kofi could barely move in that game.
The Big Ten seems to be in need of great guards, great playmakers, the guys that change the outcomes of games. And I don't know that Johnny Davis got a lot of attention, but they got beat easily because he didn't have a lot of help, like you just mentioned.
Well, that's
on
exactly
the other side of that.
That's exactly it. The Big Ten this year was a league of stars, and none of those stars had enough support in the end. EJ Liddell out there at times, almost, with the exception of Branham, almost by himself at times. Same with Johnny. Just not enough support for him. In the end, Illinois did not have enough support for Kofi, because if the support is there, if I'm dropping every open 3 you give me because you're sending 3 defenders after Kofi on every touch, then I'm a different team. But there's also the fact that one of the reasons that teams sent 3 defenders after him was because they didn't understood that he doesn't pass well out of the post. I mean, if he's gonna come back to college, which he might as well. I mean, you got to learn how to pass out of the post. The ball's got to come out. It didn't come out fast enough on a lot of those occasions, and that's why teams did that. Partly because they didn't worry about the opponent making threes when the ball came back out. But also part of it was because it would take so much effort to get the ball out that by the time the ball got back to a shooter, the shooter wouldn't be open. So that's why it worked. It just wasn't, there were a lot of great players in this league this year that didn't have enough support. And that's why the league struggled to the extent that they did in March.